This is Andi Purewal for Boxing Social in association with Betfred, and I'm delighted joined by Dan Rafael here in Las Vegas at the Canelo-Plant undercard press conference. Dan, first and foremost, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm really happy to be back out here. Had a great time out here for, as you did, I'm sure, for the third fight between Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. And here we are once again, and looking forward to being back in a couple of weeks for the big fight between Terence Crawford and Sean Porter.
Dan, whenever we catch up, there's so much to try and touch on. So much happens in boxing over the space of a few weeks. But let's start off with this weekend. A huge undisputed bout between Canelo Alvarez and Canelo-Plant. What are your thoughts on it now? We're only a matter of days away, Dan.
You know, my thoughts on the fight have really not changed since the fight was first thought about and brought up and then finally made, is that, massive respect for both fighters for taking the fight number one to produce an undisputed champion, because it's so rare. I mean, there's guys who have titles all through the different weight classes, and it's very unusual that we see an undisputed fight. Of course, the last one was earlier this year between Josh Taylor and Jose Ramirez, but there's only been, at least among the men, in the men's side of the sport, there's only been 5 previous undisputed championship fights in terms of them unifying, since the 4 belt era, and it's rare. So, credit to the guys for doing the fight. But my opinion on how it goes has been the same consistently. I have huge respect for Canelo, but also certainly for Canelo-Plant. I've known him his whole career. I've covered many of his fights. Good guy, good fighter, really good fighter. But I just feel like Canelo is the best fighter in the world right now. It's not a knock on Plant. It's just that I'm not sure what weapon that Caleb brings to the ring that is going to allow him to win enough rounds to get a decision. And I just don't see a knockout unless something freakish happens, because Caleb has never been a puncher, and Canelo has shown himself to have one of the best chins in boxing. So how does he win? I hope it's a good fight. I'm sure both guys are going to try their best and give a good account of themselves. But at the end of the day, I just feel like Canelo, wins, and probably wins pretty handily.
Do we need to see something different from Caleb? We know he's got a very good boxing skill set, but do you think we need to somehow see more of an aggressive nature to his performance to try and kind of nick the rounds off of Canelo? Because we've seen him continue to walk his opponents down, especially at super middleweight. You go back to the Callum Smith fight, it's a one-sided victory there. Avni Yildirim, it was what it was. And then you go on to Billy Joe Saunders, who was a lot more competitive, but ultimately in the end he got stopped himself.
Yeah, I think that it's similar as those fights went, because I think that guys like Canelo-Plant, Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders are all obviously world-class, top-level fighters in the sport, and they're all similar skilled. They all have sort of similar sort of resumes. They've had their titles, and they've done well for themselves. But I've said all along, Canelo is, to me, on a different level. They're all three of those guys are good fighters, very good fighters, top level, worthy rated in their weight classes. Canelo's the best fighter in boxing right now, and that's the difference in the fight.
What do you think it will eventually take then, Dan, for Canelo to lose? Will it be simply just going up one weight too many?
I mean, he's fought at light heavyweight in the one fight against Kovalev, and he won by a spectacular knockout. Of course, Kovalev was, had seen better days, but was still formidable. He was coming off a win. But yeah, how does Canelo? There's a couple ways that Canelo loses. Yes, maybe he goes back and takes a much bigger, tougher guy in a heavier weight class, where just, a more prime light heavyweight, number one. Number two, complacency, where he just doesn't work as hard as he always does and just kind of gets comfortable with what he's done. And if you don't have, as what's the cliche, the eye of the tiger, you may get beat because the other guy is training, while you're sleeping. And the other way is, a long career takes its toll on your body. And at some point, he's 31 years old. He'll eventually start to break down, like every athlete in any sport does, and just not be as quick or as sharp as he once was. So it's either, getting older, getting complacent, or just taking on too big of a challenge in terms of the size of your opponent.
Just on Canelo, I just want to get your thoughts on his comments as well about Ryan Garcia saying he needs to be a bit more committed to the sport. Do you agree with that sentiment? Do you think we need to see more from Ryan? And obviously he's got his own personal issues going on at the minute, and wish him well with what he is dealing with. But do you think we do need to eventually see him start to kind of show more kind of push for himself within boxing?
Well, I read the comments that were attributed to Canelo. Canelo's viewpoint was that he's not saying that he didn't say those words, but that the way that it was portrayed was perhaps slightly out of context. So I'll take Canelo at his word for that, because I know that he looks at Ryan Garcia as almost like a little brother. So I don't think he was trying to throw him under a bus and really be the way that it sounded if you read the words. So I feel like he said those things in the right intentions. The way that your older brother would say something to you, or your dad or your uncle or somebody to sort of motivate you or, kind of kick you in the rear end a little bit, tough love a little bit. I wouldn't say that Ryan Garcia is not committed to boxing, but he's a young man with a lot of things going on in his life, whether it's family things, he had his mental health issues, he's coming off of a surgery on his wrist. And, of course I would like to see Ryan fighting more frequently. I think Ryan would like to fight more frequently. I think Canelo was saying, I'd like to see him with us in the gym a little more, maybe. I don't think it's a case that when he's in the gym he's not taking it seriously. From everything I've ever heard about Ryan since he's a first-turn pro, when you get him in the gym to do his business, he takes it very seriously, works his rear end off. Canelo's point, I think, was maybe he just needs to do that a little bit more consistently.
Just moving away from Canelo, as you mentioned, it's been a few weeks now since that terrific trilogy clash between Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. We caught up after the fight, Dan, but now we've got a bit more time to look back on it. What a terrific way to end a historic trilogy series.
I'm still smiling. I told you that night I was going to be smiling for a long time after that fight. It was absolutely terrific. I was actually just a little while ago, before we sat down here, talking to Sugar Hill, who is, of course, Tyson Fury's trainer, and also is the trainer of Anthony Durrell, who's fighting on this undercard between Canelo and Plant. So we were sort of like talking about the fight a little bit, and he was on the winning side, just loves it. But as a boxing fan, he loves it also. I had an occasion to speak in an interview on the telephone at length for a piece that I wrote with Malik Scott. And Malik, of course, was on the losing end as the trainer. And I asked him about, if you could remove yourself from the aspect of, your disappointment because your guy didn't win the fight. And obviously, you were hoping that he would win for him and for yourself. But Malik's a boxing fan also. And he says, man, putting that stuff aside, that was just a great, great fight. So everybody involved has gone back and watched it. And whatever side they were on, knows it was an all-time classic fight. And certainly you, as somebody that was there to watch it, myself, same thing. I've watched it back now a couple of times. It just doesn't get better than that in boxing. I mean, it's unless something absolutely spectacular happens in the next couple of months, it's going to be the fight of the year for 2021. And we'll always remember just a fantastic trilogy with a and it wasn't like certain trilogies, the first fight's maybe the best one and they kind of peter out as it goes along, even if they're good fights. The trilogy between Tyson Fury and Wilder, it ended on the climatic note, because the first fight was very good with some controversy, the draw, the knockdowns, whatever. Second fight was a complete mismatch, a complete one-sided destruction for Fury, but the third fight was the classic. That's by far the best of the three. So it ended on a high note, and we'll always remember it. I mean, even whether we're a night removed from that fight, or we're now a couple of months, over a month removed from that fight, I mean, it just doesn't get better than that.
I mean, Dan, since then we've seen Eddie Hearn, who happens to be out here in Vegas as well, say that he expects to see Tyson versus Dillian Whyte ordered or mandated by the WBC in the near future. So with that in mind, do you expect it to go ahead next? Because I've also seen Joe Joyce's name thrown into the mix.
I don't know if Joe Joyce would be the next opponent, just from the mere fact that I have a hard time believing that Tyson Fury would be willing to vacate the WBC title to fight Joe Joyce when he can fight Dillian Whyte and keep the title. In other words, it's not as though Joe Joyce brings more to the table. He brings less to the table, not in terms of talent necessarily, but just in terms of financial muscle. Dillian Whyte's a bigger fight from a commercial point of view. I think everybody knows that. And part of the reason is because Dillian's just a bigger name. He's been around longer, fighting in bigger fights. I do think that'll be the next fight. I mean, unless, you can never predict with Tyson Fury. He does his own thing. But if he wants to keep the WBC title, I was talking to Mauricio Suleiman, yesterday when I got here about that order. And he said, once again, they have up until, I forget what the exact deadline was, but sometime in the next, week or so, if they could somehow make an undisputed fight with Usyk, he could bypass the mandatory. But you and I both know, and everybody knows, that that's not happening because Anthony Joshua has invoked the rematch clause. They're planning on doing the second fight between Usyk and AJ. So that means Dillian Whyte's the interim champion. That was the order, that they're going to order that fight. So when that date comes and goes, and they haven't produced a contract for Fury to fight Usyk, that means that the WBC that day or the next day will officially mandate and order him to make the defense against Dillian Whyte. I think that's a very big fight. I had in my conversation with Sugar Hill earlier today, we talked about that. He's like, look, if that's what the WBC says, then Tyson's not afraid to fight anybody. We'll welcome that fight. We had the conversation that from a commercial point of view, that's an enormous fight in the UK. You got the heavyweight champ of the world is British. You got a bona fide top contender who happens to be his mandatory challenger, who also is a pretty big name in the UK, who's done very well commercially on his own. Tyson hasn't fought in in his home country for several years at this point. That's a big fight, and it's a money fight. Tyson Fury's not running from anybody. Why wouldn't it happen? I know Dillian Whyte wants that fight, so I do think that happens. I think that's a really big fight.
Moving away from that one and just get your thoughts on the lightweight scene, we're finally going to see some of them kind of not face off with each other, but certainly get him a ring over the next coming month or so. Let's just start off with Teofimo Lopez. George Kambosos says that is the first date. Finally, it's all been sorted. It's going to be on a Matchroom show. But what should you expect from it, Daniel? What do you expect to see from Teofimo and from George, who have had a frustrating period waiting to see what was actually going to happen with their bout?
Well, I know how just hungry these guys are to get in the ring. I mean, I don't think there's anybody more disappointed that Teofimo Lopez hasn't fought for a year than Teofimo Lopez himself. I mean, he comes off of a career-making victory against Lomachenko in a gigantic victory to win all those belts and pull the upset and really launch himself. They did a big rating on ESPN, and he hasn't fought for a year, and it's very frustrating for him. He looks at Kambosos like a bump in the road. He knows that he's the big favorite, but if you watch the videos, or you talk to him, or you talk to his dad, I had a chance to do that when we were out here for Fury Wilder. He's going to be talking to some of the media a little later today at his workout. He's in unbelievable shape from what it seems to me. He's ready to go. And Kambosos, I mean, this is everything he's worked for. He's going to get his biggest payday by 10 times probably, and a chance to win all those titles in the same night. And when the fight first came up, there was a lot of conversation, like they were friendly with each other. They took pictures together when they were at an event together in California a couple years ago, and they were chums, and it was they're going to be competitors, but no bad nastiness. That has devolved, obviously, as all the chaos has happened with this fight being postponed and the back and forth. So I think George comes in with a big chip on his shoulder. He wants to say, I've waited my turn. I'm ready to become lightweight champ of the world, and I expect a pretty good fight. I know a lot of people don't give George a chance to win. I think he's got I don't make him the favorite, but I don't say he can't win that fight. He's a good boxer, and he's, you can't measure what somebody has here. I think he's got it here. See, a good fight. I'm happy it's in New York City, where, they'll have hopefully a good crowd at the MSG Theater. I'm going to go to that fight. I'm psyched for it. I can't wait. I love Teofimo Lopez, and I've enjoyed watching George's fights that I've seen.
People love to talk about that lightweight scene, and they talk about Teofimo, Devin, who actually clashed ringside after Mikey Garcia's defeat to Sandor Martin. And we saw Eddie say after that, they're only fighting a week apart, so there's no excuse really for them not to discuss a potential fight there. Also have Tank fighting the day after Devin. Theoretically speaking, Dan, would you agree there is no excuse for at least two of those guys to face off at some point, say before spring next year?
I have said for quite a while now that not necessarily that they're the four best lightweights, but they're certainly the four most intriguing of the younger lightweights, and that's Lopez, Ryan Garcia, Tank Davis, and of course Devin Haney. And that you can make a match between mix and match any of those four guys, and I'm definitely up for that fight. So Ryan's on the sidelines at the moment with the injury. Haney's got a very stiff challenge against Joseph Diaz Jr. Teofimo has his fight coming up. Like you said, they're a week apart. They both have certain claims to the WBC title. Devin Haney is the official WBC champion. Teofimo Lopez accepted the franchise title, even though that drives me nuts. But the bottom line is, like you said, there is no reason whatsoever that they cannot make that fight afterwards. Whether it's on a DAZN show, whether it's on a top-ranked ESPN show, whether they come together and do it together in some pay-per-view element, whatever it is, they got to fight each other. Because, Lopez loves to run around saying, I'm undisputed champ. And I love Teofimo Lopez. He's a tremendous talent and a good dude, and he's a hell of a fighter. But in my mind, he's not undisputed champ. He can say it all he wants, but just because you say it over and over doesn't make it true. Devin Haney is the WBC champion. Don't give me this shit about I'm the email champ. There's a zillion champions in boxing that got their titles as an elevated situation because the other guy didn't do the mandatory. It wasn't Lopez, it was Lomachenko that asked for that franchise title. And then the WBC broke its own edict when they announced the franchise title. I won't bore everybody with the details, but the bottom line was the franchise title was never supposed to be transferred in the ring if you won against the guy that held it. So Lopez is the best lightweight out there right now. He's the unified champion, and he deserves to be considered number one in the division. But I cannot use the word undisputed because that means you have all four of the main belts, and he doesn't have them. And Devin Haney does, and he's a talented guy. He was willing to do the mandatory. He wasn't the one that ducked out of it or tried to go and do something else. And by the way, I got no problem with Lomachenko going to fight Lopez instead of Haney. That was a big fight. But if you say you're undisputed like Teofimo does, and Haney's holding that BC title, and now you're going to be the franchise champion and the full champion, no reason not to fight each other. They're two young guys. They'll make a good fight together, clashing styles. They'll talk a lot of stuff together. It can be a great promotion. That's a great fight. And Tank Davis, I'd love to see him fight any of those guys too. I think actually, for my money, the biggest fight in boxing maybe, beyond like say if Fury were to fight the Usyk AJ winner for undisputed or whatever, but besides heavyweights, maybe the biggest and best fight from my point of view, just as a fan, you give me Teofimo Lopez against Tank Davis. That is a very, very marketable fight. That is a gargantuan event. I don't know if it will happen. It's very hard to make given the companies involved. But the point is, there's so many good fights that you can make at lightweight. It would really be almost criminal if some of those guys didn't match off with each other over at least the next year, and hopefully more than one, because I have no doubt in my mind that some of those fights will produce classics where you'll see rematches. But they got to sign on the dotted line and do it. I mean, this is the time to do it. They're in their 20s. There's nothing holding them back. Let's get it on.
Final one, Dan, before I let you go. We've seen Isaac Cruz will step in to face Tank on December 5th now due to some allegations made against Rolly Romero, which are still ongoing. Just wanted to get your take now on seeing Tank versus Isaac Cruz. What should the fans expect from that bout now?
I actually think from a competitive standpoint, it's probably a better fight than the Romero fight. Romero and Tank was an interesting promotion because they talk so much stuff. Raleigh is a great promoter. He's got obviously, he mentioned his issues, the sexual assault allegation against him that the police are investigating, so he's sitting this one out. They basically were like, we're going to put you to the side. But if you can replace a Rolly Romero with a guy at the level of an Isaac Cruz, you've done a good job. Now, I know there are people that argue the merit of that fight being on pay-per-view, but what they don't understand is Tank Davis is going to fight on pay-per-view, whoever he's fighting. That's just a decision that his handlers at Mayweather Promotions, PBC, and Showtime have made. They are putting him on pay-per-view. So accept that and then hope they can get the best opponent possible. And I think that Isaac Cruz, he's an appealing fighter. He's looked really good in his last few fights against an increasing level of opposition. The dude hasn't lost since 2016, I believe. He's a bona fide contender. I mean, I watched when he knocked out Diego Magdaleno in the first round. I know Diego may have seen better days, but nobody had ever done that to him like that, and that was absolutely spectacular. He's got a couple of good wins since then also. So, again, is it the most competitive, greatest fight of all time? Not at all. But you know what? It's not a bad fight, and I like watching Tank fight. So, to me, Rolly Romero, Isaac Cruz, 6-1, half a dozen the other, I don't care. I'm watching either way.
Right, Dan, we'll leave that there and I'll leave you to enjoy the rest of your day. I appreciate your time as always. Pleasure to catch up with you and enjoy Saturday night. Thank you for speaking to Boxing Social.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.